Mr. Bamford, could you give us your perspective and your assessment on both of these programs that we've been talking about? First of all, the PRISM program, and then the data that was collected from Verizon.
Well, I think it's extraordinary the amount of reach that the NSA has taken over the last few years. I mean, this is an agency that was designed originally to spy only outside the United States, to spy on foreign governments and not to spy on U.S. citizens. And here the program allows NSA to get access, it looks like virtually unlimited access, to the major internet providers, Google, Yahoo, Microsoft, Facebook, and so forth in the U.S.
What's different about these programs than ones we similarly heard about during the Bush administration?
Well, the Bush administration, it seemed like it was far more limited than what we see here. First of all, in the Bush administration, there were really no allegations that they were focusing on purely domestic communications. And the program involving the telecom companies, Verizon and so forth, involves not only domestic communications but local communications. In other words, if you're calling your next door neighbor. So there was never this far reach in the Bush administration, although that program itself was quite extensive. What happened, though, was that after the Bush administration, warrantless eavesdropping program, was codenamed Stellar Wind. After that was revealed by the New York Times, the Congress basically just allowed that program to continue under the rubric of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Amendments Act. So it basically codified into law the activities of the Bush warrantless eavesdropping program, and then they've been expanded on by the Obama administration.
We heard Senator Dianne Feinstein and others talk about their knowledge of the program, but also for the fact that since courts are involved in the gathering of this information, that it shouldn't be an alarm to average citizens.
Well, I think that's such a misnomer in terms of describing the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. When it was originally set up, it was a very powerful court that exercised jurisdiction over who was being eavesdropped on. That was back in 1978, and that's how it worked from 1978 until 2001. And then that's when the Bush administration went around, secretly went around the court, and then after that was discovered, what Congress did was basically neuter the court. It took away a lot of its enforcement powers. It basically made it a rubber stamp, turned the FISA court into a rubber stamp. So by saying that, don't worry, the FISA court's overseeing our operations is really nonsense.
When it comes to the type of data that's gathered, is the term metadata and the way it's described with it's just when the call was placed, how long, et cetera, is it as innocuous as it's projected by even Verizon and some who talk about the program?
Well, the metadata is all the externals from the telephone call, except for the conversation. It's where a call was made from, which number is calling which other number, the frequency of the calling. All that information, if it's just bland information, it won't really mean much. But what the NSA does, what NSA's job basically is to data mine all that information. In other words, take it and turn it into something meaningful. So it's when you start analyzing all that information that you start sort of value adding it, and that's where you start getting into issues of privacy and so forth. People in the U.S. are supposed to have some degree of privacy with their communications. If I call my next door neighbor, I wouldn't expect that the NSA would have a reason to have a record of that, or how long I spoke, or how often I spoke, or who I called after that. I mean, why are these, it's absurd to me that these agencies have this power to do this type of surveillance.
John Podhoretz in the New York Post has an op-ed on this issue, and some of the arguments he makes is saying, let's get this straight, Verizon has 120 million customers, 120 million whatever it is the NSA is searching for, it isn't the use of a phone sex line or your jokes about Barack Obama or your gambling problem or anything about you, dear reader. The thing is, no matter how important you are to yourself, you're exactly that unimportant to the computers at the National Security Agency. How would you respond to that?
Well, I've never known John
Podhoretz?
Yeah, Podhoretz to be an expert on the NSA. I haven't seen his writings on the NSA lately. I think that's just a bad analysis of what the U.S. stands for. The U.S. doesn't stand for massive surveillance. That's what George Orwell wrote about in 1984, where you have a surveillance society and everything is, the government has access to everything. It's absurd to think that that this is a great deterrent to terrorism. I mean, why didn't they prevent the Boston bombing? If this is such a great program, how about the underwear bomber, the Times Square bomber? The U.S. Has had a really bad record in terms of preventing these terrorist incidents, and it's one reason is because they have too much information and not too little information. I mean, the bigger you build the haystack, the more difficult it is to find the needle. And all they keep doing is building the haystack bigger and bigger. And instead of hiring people to put more hay on the stack, they should be hiring more analysts to analyze what's in the stack instead of just acquiring more and more information. I mean, that's what I got from reading this article about the PRISM is that they keep wanting, we've got 9 of the major companies. Now we need more. We're trying to get more companies, information from more companies. And if it's so great, why do these bombings keep happening? All I've heard is that there may have been some terrorist incident that was prevented that they don't give any details of. Well, one of
the statements from the White House, James Bamford, was that the president was open to a discussion about this type of activity, the gathering of information versus concerns about national security and privacy. Do you think these revelations of stories will open on a dialogue on Capitol Hill about where we are as far as privacy is concerned?
Well, the problem you have on Capitol Hill is that all these Congress people, senators and the members of Congress want to play it safe after 9/11. They know that there's no value in siding with civil liberties because when you go up for re-election, your opponent is going to say, unless you voted for, some heavy-handed legislation involving surveillance or whatever, that you're weak on terrorism. And nobody wants to be accused of being weak on terrorism. So you get very little support in Congress for moderation or for lowering the bar when it comes to all this surveillance. And so I don't expect too much to come out of Congress. I haven't expected anything out of Congress for years, if not decades.
One more question, James Bamford. As far as after the information's taken and what's done with it, there's a picture in one of the papers this morning that shows something called the NSA's Utah Data Center in Bluffdale, Utah. Is that where the information is stored once it's gathered, or are there other places?
No, I actually wrote the cover story on that, on the NSA data storage in Bluffdale, Utah. I wrote the cover story on that program for Wired Magazine last year. It's a 1 million square foot data center, and that will be the central location where all the information that NSA picks up, whether it's by satellite or from this PRISM collection or from the call details from the Verizon and so forth, and all the information they pick up surveilling the Middle East, Libya, Afghanistan, and so forth. They all go to this one location, this 1 million square foot data center in Bluffdale, Utah, and that will serve as the NSA's cloud. In other words, from that or to that location, the NSA analysts at headquarters and other places will be able to access all the data that's sitting in there through heavily secured fiber optic cables. So it serves as the central repository for NSA's surveillance capabilities and the point where the analysts dip into and come out of electronically to analyze the information.
James Bamford, national security writer, a longtime writer about these kind of issues, also an author as well, and writes for several publications, joining us to give his perspective. Mr. Bamford, thanks for your time.